بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Inshallah, today we begin a new station, that is the station of al-ilm, the station of knowledge. And the beginning part of the station, Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi spends a bit of time quoting our pious predecessors and what they said about knowledge and the importance of knowledge. And so Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi begins by saying, وَهَذِهِ الْمَنْزِلَةِ إِن لَمْ تصحب السالك من أول قدم يضعه في الطريق إلى آخر قدم ينتهي إليه فسلوكه على غير طريق. He says that this concept of knowledge is not constantly with the individual as they pursue Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they're not really following any path. Meaning any path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, knowledge is our source of guidance. Islamic knowledge of Islam, knowledge of Quran, Hadith. That is how we know we are doing what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so from the very first step we take in our pursuit of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until the very last breath we take, we always need knowledge of Quran and Hadith to be with us. And it's so incredible when you think at how Islam has detailed the human's life. From the first moment a child is born, there are things that we can do, things that we should do. For example, part of the sunnah is that when a child is first born, shave the hair off and then give that amount in gold, the amount in gold. Name the child on the seventh day. Perhaps the wisdom of that is when you start interacting with the child for about 7 days, you kind of get a type of connection, a type of feel. And I only have one child, but you all have multiple, alhamdulillah. And maybe each child that was born, you felt a different type of connection to that child. And so to name that child in accordance to that connection that you feel, perhaps that's the wisdom, among other things. A weaker hadith says that give the adhan in the child's ear. It's a weaker hadith. But nonetheless, from the moment a child is born, how we take care of it, and as the days go on until the last breath of an individual. If you are by a person taking their last breath, encourage them to say the shahada. That person should be on the right side if they can, and say the shahada if they can, among other things. So knowledge, when it comes to Islamic knowledge is there from the first moment we are born, guiding us until the last breath that we take, guiding us. And the same thing comes for our spirituality, our iman, our relationship, our heart's relationship and connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It needs to be in accordance to knowledge. And then Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi says, and this is a very important point, وَلَمْ يَنْهَ عَنِ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قُطَّاعِ الطَّرِيقِ مِنْهُمْ وَنُوَابِ إِبْلِيسِ وَشُرَطُهُ. Ibn Qayyim says that the only people who discourage knowledge and who discourage people from pursuing knowledge are the bandits and the robbers, meaning those who want to steal your iman and want to cut your path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as well as Iblis and his army. And so no real scholar of Islam is going to discourage you from seeking knowledge. It is simply contradictory to the entire purpose of the Quran and Hadith. And that is for you to know, for you to contemplate, for you to reflect on these verses, so that it's more than just an abstract idea in your mind, but rather it roots in the heart. And so as soon as you hear someone discouraging you from listening to another person, from seeking knowledge beyond his quarters or her quarters, know that this person is part of the army of Iblis. Part of the army of Iblis, whether they realize it or not. Okay. So knowledge is power, and it's not any different when it comes to Islam, so long as that knowledge is authentic knowledge that goes back to the correct method of understanding Quran and Hadith. And al-Junayd, rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the grandest spiritualists in our tradition, he says that الطرق كلها مسدودة على الخلق إلا على من اقتفى آثار الرسول sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Junayd rahimahullah ta'ala says that all the paths are cut off, all the paths are closed, all the paths have a dead end, meaning the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, except the path that follows the residue of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Except the path that follows what remains of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, that is his hadith. In other words, what he is saying is that the only valid path to Allah is by following the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. What he did, what he said, how he did it, etc. Al-Junayd rahimahullah ta'ala also said, من لم يحفظ القرآن ويكتب الحديث لا يقتدى به في هذا الأمر لأن علمنا مقيد بالكتاب والسنة. Whoever doesn't have the Quran memorized and whoever doesn't write hadith. In other words, he's saying whoever doesn't have knowledge of Quran and whoever doesn't have knowledge of hadith. That's what's meant by memorizing the Quran and writing hadith, not just memorizing the Quran. Someone can have the Quran memorized, but they're a young child. I mean, we're not going to follow them when it comes to our Islam. And someone might have the Quran memorized, but they're not a person of iman nor a person of knowledge. They can't tell you even how to make wudu. Right? So what Al-Junayd rahimahullah ta'ala means is that whoever has knowledge of the Quran, is a scholar of the Quran and a scholar of hadith, then whoever doesn't have knowledge of Quran, whoever doesn't have knowledge of hadith, then we're not going to emulate them in our Islam. They're not going to be how we understand Islam, and they're not going to be our role models for Islam. Because our knowledge, our Islam is confined to and constructed and regulated by Quran and Sunnah. Very simple concept, but nonetheless very important. And this is a major question that Muslim Americans are asking. Not just that, really, it seems like it's a type of global concern. And that is, with the onset of social media, anyone can become famous. And a lot of times, the fame of a person is really their charisma. They just have a good way of speaking, and they're a good storyteller. And they build a huge following. So some of the popular figures of Islam in the Muslim world have like 20 plus million followers. It's incredible, right? It's huge. And now with kind of the turmoil in the Middle East when it comes to the political situation and these politicians going after the mashayikh and those who are popular on social media, we're finding a lot of what seems to be in the outwardly to us, some problematic decisions by these individuals, problematic behaviors by these individuals, unregulated support, unrestricted support of people who are clearly doing wrong things. Now, I'm personally of the opinion that these people are coerced into what they do. They're coerced into what they do. And it's very important for us to realize that if we were in their situation, it's not like we're going to do any better. Let's be very clear. Because we would be coerced just as much. And they're brutal. We know the politicians are brutal. They won't just go after the person, they'll go after their family. They'll destroy everything in their life. And if that's the case, then Islam gives a person an excuse, to an extent, of course. And anyone who thinks they would do any better in that situation is truly delusional. No one. Except very few people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put some spark of iman in their hearts to be able to endure that. I mean, even in this time of the Salaf, the time of Imam Ahmad, when there was also something similar going on, where the politicians were pressuring and coercing the scholars to adopt a very unorthodox opinion, and that is that Quran is created. Every single scholar buckled. Every single one. The exception of Imam Ahmad. And Imam Ahmad did his best to avoid that situation. He did his best to stay out of the public figure, as we call them, scene. But nonetheless, the fitna reached him. But when he saw that everyone else buckled, he knew that Islamically he cannot buckle at this point. Islamically, he is obligated to speak the truth, because if he doesn't speak the truth, the entirety of the ummah is going to go astray. Right? And that is a fiqh ruling. And so when we see individuals who are buckling under political pressure, I think that our reaction to them shouldn't be, oh, you traitors, oh, you this, and oh, you that. Okay? But rather, for us to take the role that they cannot. That is the brotherhood of the ummah. I know that the scholars in Saudi Arabia or in Egypt, to name these countries, they cannot speak out against their rulers. But we could in America. So instead of criticizing them for something that they're probably coerced into doing, right? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm sure there are some of them who are in it for the money, no doubt. There always have been people like this. There always will be, okay? But I'm speaking in general. We'll leave that to them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in general, instead of criticizing them, putting them down, and developing this mindset in the average Muslim mind, the mind of the average Muslim, that all these shuyukh, they're traitors, and they're all their knowledge doesn't benefit them, and who are they, and I'm going to take the role up myself and whatnot. Instead of developing that rhetoric in their mindset, rather, let us develop the mindset of ta'awanu 'ala al-birri wa taqwa. Let us assist each other in birr and taqwa, in piety and righteousness. And so if they cannot do something, as their brother in Islam, I'm going to take it up for them. Because I, here in America, have the freedom to do that. They don't. So this is how we put our hands together, right, and work together towards what is best. Right? And whenever you see this, oh, let's criticize them and whatnot, in my experience, a lot of that goes back to ill intent. Fighting between factions. So when for example, the scholars or the public, the da'is in the Gulf are, doing certain behaviors, you find that people who are anti-Salafi begin to attack them. So we have to ask the question, is this really out of taqwa? This criticism against them, is it really out of taqwa? Or is it an opportunity to take the rug from under them? To usurp their popularity and their authority within the Muslim world? We have to ask that question. And just because someone is speaking the truth does not mean they're intending the truth. Just because someone is speaking truth to power, this thing that's being said a lot these days, doesn't mean they're actually doing it for the sake of Allah. So someone might be on the right side of history, but on the wrong side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so to speak. And someone might be on the wrong side of history, but on the right side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's possible. Now, the best form is that we apply Islam outwardly and inwardly, despite the scenario and despite the situation. But who can do that? Except very, very few people. We cannot base our strategy on this. Right? And that's a whole other huge topic. Another thing that's a major concern is that as a result of this, the social media and whatnot, people who aren't qualified to speak about Islam have become authoritative figures and influencers of Islam. And you find these are the people who, with time, scandals come around, or people start saying, okay, what is this person doing? They're in a place they're not supposed to be. Because social media, essentially, whoever rises in social media tends to be, not always, there are some major scholars on social media who are worthy of that, in both Muslim in America and elsewhere. They're worthy of it. I put them in. But there are a lot of people who aren't. So where do we get our knowledge? How do we know that this person is truly a scholar, truly worthy of their place? Well, a lot of it has to do with making sure you diversify your sources of knowledge. You know how they say diversify your portfolio? Don't put all your money in one company. Diversify it. The same thing when it comes to knowledge. Diversify it between various scholars as well as through books. One of the things, I noticed with my own teacher, he would teach me something. I would ask him a question, he would answer that question. And I kid you not, many times, a few days later, I'd be reading, I'd find the same exact thing written in the books. Literally, sometimes verbatim, like exactly as he said it. So what does this teach me? This person knows what he's saying. So we need to diversify our knowledge, and that is by listening to more than one person, as well as making sure you read books. But if you only focus on one person, then what do the scholars say? If you only have one sheikh, then your sheikh becomes your shaitan. And if you only read from books, then your books become your shaitan. What does that mean? Does it mean that sheikh literally is a devil? No. Does it mean the books are written by the devil? No. What happens is you only get a very limited perception of Islam, and that can be used against you. Right? It can be used against you to develop arrogance, to develop self-righteousness, among other things. The shaitan can use that against you. So it's not that the shaykh or the book itself is the shaitan, but rather when you're limited in your scope, that can be used against you. Okay. Now Abu Uthman rahimahullah ta'ala said, "Man ammara sunnata ala nafs," or before that, قالوا أبو عثمان النسابوري رحمه الله تعالى الصحبة مع الله بحسن الأدب ودوام الهيبة والمراقبة. Our relationship with Allah, our companionship with Allah, is through good manners and constantly having that haiba, that reverence of Allah, as well as constantly acknowledging Allah's seeing of you. Allah's holding you accountable. That is how we build our companionship with Allah. So we behave with good manners, and we're constantly thinking of Allah in a sense that He is watching us, and that we are constantly glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَالصُّحْبَةُ مَعَ الرَّسُولِ عَلَيْهِ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامِ بِاتِّبَاعِ سُنَّتِهِ وَلُزُومِ ظَاهِرِ الْعِلْمِ. And how we have companionship with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam is by following his sunnah and by trying to apply the religion as much as possible in accordance to the apparent meaning of what he is saying. What does this mean? The Prophet ﷺ says something. There's an apparent meaning to that. So, for example, let me think of an example. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. What is a Bunya al-Islam ala khams? Islam was built on 5 things. شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة وصوم رمضان وحج البيت إن استطاع إليه سبيلا. The 5 pillars of Islam. Now, how do we what is the apparent meaning of this? Is that there are 5 pillars of Islam. They're called shahada and salah and zakah and etc. This is the apparent meaning. Sometimes what people do is that they say, no, there are secret meanings behind it. And so salah, yeah, there's this thing called 5 daily prayers, but there's something else behind it. There's a hidden meaning behind it. Right? So if we want companionship with the Prophet ﷺ, you look at what he's apparently saying, and don't try to say, no, I think he's saying this. I think he's actually saying this. This is where problems start. Right? And so if I say, for example, oh, so-and-so, can you get me a bottle of water? And you go and say, you know what, I actually think the sheikh is saying he wants orange juice. Right? Why? Because, well, this and that, and one time this and one time that, and you come back with a bottle of orange juice. That is an incorrect application of what I'm requesting. This is the idea here. If the Prophet says something, we hold it in accordance to the apparent meaning, and not try to assume he meant this, or to assume it means that, or to ask the question, well, what is the hidden meaning, or anything like that. So that is how we have companionship with the Prophet ﷺ, following his sunnah and understanding what he says in accordance to the apparent meaning. And companionship with Allah's awliya, the righteous people, is bil ihtirami wal khidma, by respecting them and by helping them in any way we can help them. Wa ma'al ahl, and with our family. Companionship with our family is bi husnil khuluq, good manners. Solves 99% of all marital problems. Right here. Have good manners, and you'll be fine. How can a woman not love her husband if he has such good manners? And how can a husband not love his wife if she has really good manners? It might not be they have this romantic life and just a love story that should be written and made into movies. It might not be that, but it will at least be a decent life, a decent marriage. Husn al-khuluq, good manners. And when you look at most marital problems, it goes back to just some sort of bad manners. From the men's side, it's very often stinginess. When a man is stingy with his wife, she can't handle that. And no one can handle a stingy person. And when a woman has bad manners with her husband, it's normally about the constant questioning and the constant nagging. Why this? Why didn't you do this? Where are you? Why are you coming late? Why did you do this? How come you do that? Right? It's just bad manners. And so How do we have companionship with our family members? With good manners. وَمَعَ الْإِخْوَانِ, with our fellow Muslims, brothers, sisters, or neighbors, or whoever it is, بِدَوَامِ الْبِشْرِ, by constantly smiling with them. You know, if you want to have good friendship, you want to have a good social stature, smile. It really goes a long way. مَا لَمْ يَكُنْ إِثْمًا, so long as that doesn't lead to a sin. So you don't smile to a Muslim if they're sitting there drinking alcohol, right? Or if they're sitting doing something haram. And finally, how do we have companionship with the ignorant people? Whenever you see scholars talking about ignorant people, it tends to be very sarcastic and funny, but nonetheless, there's wisdom behind it. How do we have companionship with the ignorant people? Ignorant in terms of, just these people they're behaving in an ignorant way. بِالدُّعَاء لَهُمْ وَالرَّحْمَةِ, by making dua for them and Allah having mercy on them. That's how we have companionship with the ignorant people. And in another statement by Abu Uthman, مَنْ أَمَّرَ السُنَّةَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ قَوْلًا وَفِعْلًا نطق بالحكمة ومن أمر الهوى على نفسه قولا وفعلا نطق بالبدعة قال الله تعالى وإن تطيعوه تهتدوا. Whoever puts the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in command, in charge of their actions, in their what they say and what they do, then they will speak wisdom. But if they put their desires in charge of their actions and their decisions, that they will speak innovation. They will fall into innovation. And when you look at all bid'ah in our tradition, and this is a very general statement that's often difficult to prove, but in my own experience, bid'ah, innovation in faith, always goes back to some sort of desire. Always. It could be desire for power, desire for money, desire for reputation, prestige, desire for the opposite gender, whatever it may be. It goes back to some sort of desire. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن تُطِيعُوهُ تَهْتَدُوا. If you obey him, the Prophet ﷺ, then you will be guided. And you will be following guidance. And what do we understand conversely? If you don't obey the Prophet ﷺ, meaning you have this intentional disregard for the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, then the opposite is going to happen. You will be misguided. Because if it's not following the Prophet ﷺ, then what are we following? Our desires. Our desires. قال أبو محمد بن الفضل البامجي من مشايخ القوم الكبار ذهاب الإسلام من أربعة. This individual says Islam erodes and deteriorates, whether in society as a whole or in a person's heart, due to four things, or one of these four things. لا يعملون بما يعلمون. The first is that they don't act upon what they know. They don't act upon what they know. And of course, what's meant here is Islamic knowledge, right? If you know things about economics and how to invest and you don't act upon it, we're not going to say that you're eroding your Islam. But if you know this is the sunnah, you don't act upon it. If you know this is an obligation and you don't act upon it, that erodes a person's iman, just like a cavity erodes a person's tooth. So knowing something but not applying it is quite similar to a cavity in a person's tooth. وَيَعْمَلُونَ بِمَا لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. So that was the first one. The second one is they act in accordance to what they don't know. They try to apply Islam, but they don't have the knowledge to support what they're doing. That erodes a person's iman. وَلَا يَتَعَلَّمُونَ بِمَا يَعْمَلُونَ. Now, I don't know exactly what he means here, but essentially he's saying they don't learn what they do. They don't learn about what they are doing. And if I'm understanding this correctly, I think what he means is the following. The average Muslim knows how to pray. The average Muslim knows how to fast. They do these things. So they have the knowledge of these things. But they might even be applying it. So the average Muslim knows this, and let's say, inshallah, the average Muslim applies these things. If they don't improve their knowledge of what they are doing, what tends to happen is it makes their actions very stale, seemingly meaningless. Yeah, I come and I pray and I fast Ramadan and whatnot, but what is this really doing for me? And if these questions aren't answered, if a person isn't trying to improve, enhance their knowledge of Islam and what they are already doing, then that can be a type of withering of the person's iman. Why? Because what they do becomes very stale, seemingly meaningless. It becomes nothing more than just a habit. And the habit loses its taste. It loses its meaning. So that's the third. And the fourth, وَيَمْنَعُونَ النَّاسِ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ وَالتَّعْلِيمِ. And they restrict people or discourage people from knowledge and learning. When you see this as the general kind of spirits of a people or of a person, then that's a huge sign that Islam is eroding in a place. For example, in the Ottoman Empire, I was shocked when I heard this. One of the experts of the Ottoman Empire, he said that Islam as a type of way of life, that really died out about 200 years before the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So Islam was something that was just there. You might find people who pray, but it was just something that is just there. Right? Maybe similar in a way to kind of Christianity here in America. A lot of people are just Christian by name, that's it. And they might go to church once a week, but beyond that, it really played no role. It wasn't interesting to the people. And subhanAllah, you find that when this began to happen, that is when the Ottoman Empire began to start to decline. And this is from the Islamic perspective, our narrative. That when people care about Islam, that nation, that society rises. But when people stop caring about Islam, that society falls. And just look around you. Look around you. I mean, we see this in front of our eyes. Nations that are caring more and more about Islam are now beginning to rise, while nations who once cared a lot about Islam, but now slowly are caring less and less about, are starting to decline. We see this right in front of our eyes. So when this begins to settle in, that is a huge problem. But conversely, we can build optimism from the opposite, that when you see a people who are concerned about Islamic knowledge, who are interested in Islamic knowledge, then that is a very healthy sign, even if there's argument, even if there are problems and whatnot. And this is the way I see Islam in America. I think the average Muslim in America, aside from all the problems and all the concerns, whether that's Muslims, many Muslims being very neutral towards immoral behaviors and whatnot, or a lot of Muslims who are very humanistic in their approach of Islam, just be a good person and whatnot. Nonetheless, you find that there is interest in learning about Islam. There is interest in teaching Islam, in making sure we have the institutions that offer this, whether that's a masjid or whatever. And that's the way I see it. I'm just trying to be optimistic here. Maybe some people see it in a different way, but Allah ta'ala alam. Ibn Atta rahimahullah ta'ala says, "Man alzama nafsahu adab as-sunnah nawwara Allahu qalbahu bi nur al-ma'rifah. لا مقام أشرف من مقام متابعة الحبيب في أوامره وأفعاله وأخلاقه." Ibn Atta rahimahullah ta'ala says, whoever sticks to the manners of the sunnah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will light his heart with nur, with a nur of knowing, the nur of knowledge. And there is no more dignified and noble stature or state or status in Islam than following the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So those who look at hadith as being something, who cares about this? Let's just focus on the Quran and don't worry about the sunnah, it's just a sunnah. These people are depriving themselves of true Islam. If you want to be a good Muslim, follow the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The better a Muslim is, the more resembling they are of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. That's how it works. Abu Ishaq al-Raqi said that علامة محبة الله إيثار طاعته ومتابعة رسوله. This individual says that the sign of true and sincere love of Allah. When do we have true and sincere love of Allah? The sign of that is always giving precedence to obeying Allah. I have a choice to make. Either follow my desire or apply what Allah said. I apply what Allah says, and that at that moment, I loved Allah more than I loved myself. And following the Prophet ﷺ. These are the two things. Obey Allah and obey His Messenger. That is a sign that a person truly loves Allah and His Messenger. And knowledge, Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayh says, knowledge is the inheritance of the prophets and their legacy. Al-ulama warathatul anbiya. The scholars are the inheritors of prophets. Meaning anyone who pursues knowledge, then they are pursuing what the prophets have left behind, alayhim salatu wassalam. And they are the people of the prophets and their intimate group and their inheritors. And knowledge is the life of the heart. And it is the light of insight. And it is the cure for all ailments in the chest, meaning the spiritual ailments and the emotional ailments. And it is the exercise of the mind. And it is the pleasure of the soul. And it is the friendship, or what provides friendship and affection to those who are lonely. And it is the guidance of the one who is confused. And it is the scale which we scale all of our actions, our words, and our spiritual states. So it is a scale. We know this is right and this is wrong. And through knowledge, we know Allah and we worship Him. We get to know Allah and we worship Him. And we remember Him. And we do tawheed of Him. And we praise Him. And we glorify Him. And through knowledge, we apply guidance. And it is the guidance of those who seek Allah. And it is our path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And through knowledge, we know our religion. And we know the rulings of our religion. And we differentiate between halal and haram. And through knowledge, we establish ties of kin. We take care of our parents. What is their rights? What am I responsible for doing? Among other things. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala said, الناس إلى العلم أحوج منهم إلى الطعام والشراب. Imam Ahmad says that we are more in need of knowledge than we are in need of food and drink. Think about this. We need knowledge more than we need food and drink. Why is that? لأن الرجل يحتاج إلى الطعام والشراب في اليوم مرة أو مرتين وحاجته إلى العلم بعدد أنفاسه. Because in a day, we need 1 meal, 2 meals. Right? In our time, 3 meals, maybe a few snacks and whatnot. But when it comes to knowledge, we need knowledge in every breath we take. Why? Because we're accountable for all that we say, all that we do, all that we look at, all that we don't do. Allah is going to ask us about it all. And so we need knowledge every second of our life. And the more knowledge we have, the more insight we have. The more insight we have, the better we know how to act and react, what to do in each and every circumstance and situation. And Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala said, طَلَبُ الْعِلْمِ أَفْضَلُ مِنْ صَلَاةِ النَّافِلَةِ. Seeking knowledge is better than extra prayer. Seeking knowledge is better than extra prayer. In other words, right now you have 2 free hours for our Tuesday session. You have a choice. You could come here and listen and learn, or you can stay home and pray and read Quran for 2 hours. What Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala is saying is that it's better for you to come here than for you to pray for 2 hours. Abu Hanifa has said something similar, rahimahullah ta'ala. Ibn Wahab says that I was with Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, and I put down what I was writing on. So he was sitting there learning from Imam Malik. He had a scroll or something. He was writing on it. So he put it down. And he stood up to pray. So Imam Malik said, what you're standing up to do is not better than what you were sitting down and doing. Meaning you're better off learning than you are praying this extra prayer. Again, very specific here, the extra prayers. Not the sunnah prayers. Because doing the sunnah prayers is what? We are applying what we know. We learned that the Prophet ﷺ had certain sunnahs that he would pray frequently and consistently all the time, to the extent that he would make it up if he missed it or he was distracted from doing it. He was busy doing something else. And so the fruit of knowledge is action, applying what we know. And so since the sunnah is part of that knowledge, applying it takes precedence over 5 minutes, let's say 2 minutes for the 2 rak'ahs. Applying that knowledge is more important than studying an extra 2 minutes. Does that make sense? But when it comes to the extra prayers, then seeking knowledge is better. قال أبو إسماعيل رحمه الله تعالى العلم ما قام بدليل ورفع الجهل. Abu Ismail رحمه الله تعالى says that knowledge, he's defining knowledge here. Knowledge is what is established by evidence and removes ignorance. So what is knowledge? What happens sometimes is the following. A person is eloquent in their speech, and they speak, but they're just speaking. They're just speaking thoughts. They're not really providing knowledge. They're not really providing knowledge. So let me give you a clear example. Philosophers. When you look at their books and their writings and their philosophies, it's not really based on true evidence. It's based on a type of rational inquiry. That if A plus B equals C, then we take this and apply it to some sort of philosophical question, then we come out with the same result. This isn't really evidence. It's not based on something quantifiable, qualifiable, testable. It's just thoughts. And so the four imams, rahimahullah ta'ala, they really went after these types of people who try to take Islam and just philosophize everything. And Imam Malik, I believe it's Imam Malik, rahimahullah ta'ala, who said that when these people start debating, it's not about who has the better evidence, or stronger evidence. It's just about who's more eloquent. That's it. But when it comes to Quran and Sunnah, or fiqh, for example, we can determine who has the stronger evidence. There are ways of measuring that. There are ways of testing that. Right? And so, what Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala is saying is actually quite powerful. In order for something to be actual knowledge, there needs to be evidence that supports it, and not just some sort of eloquent way of presenting what they think. And number two, it needs to remove knowledge. What does this mean? For example, how do I make wudu? You go and you find certain hadith, you test what the scholar said in accordance to, does it fit the linguistic definitions of what's being said by the Prophet ﷺ. You test it, you say, okay, this is how you make wudu. Now, that question you once had, that ignorance you once had is now removed, because now you know how to make wudu. On the contrary, when you look at philosophers and we start asking these questions and these deep philosophical questions, it doesn't really remove ignorance. A lot of times, the more they philosophize, the more confused they become. Right? And so you find this a lot in the Muslim scholars who entered philosophy for a period of time. Like Imam al-Ghazali, in the earlier part of his life, was very much into philosophy. And it just increased him in confusion. Right? And so, what is knowledge? What has evidence? And what removes ignorance? So how do you know what this person is teaching you is actual knowledge? Look at how much they source it in Quran and Hadith. It's very important. But someone who rarely ever mentions Quran and Hadith, right? Put an X on that person. Even if they're saying, I'm speaking the truth, and this is the haqq, and this is this. But they rarely ever quote a verse of the Quran or a Hadith. This person is speaking from his own mind. Right? Even if what he's saying seems to be the truth. And it removes ignorance. وهو على 3 درجات. الدرجة الأولى علم جلي به يقع العيان واستفاضة صحيحة أو صحة تجربة قديمة. The first level of knowledge is apparent knowledge. Knowledge, observable knowledge. What is this referring to? This is really referring to knowledge that is acquired through basic observation. Basic and clear observation. And Abu Ismail points to 3 things. What your eyes see. So, the sky is blue. Is that a bit of information? Is that knowledge? No, it's a type of knowledge. The sky is blue. It's a fact, right? But how did you acquire it? Simply by looking. So when something is tangible to the senses, it is an obvious fact. And it doesn't require much evidence. And you don't need to support this with evidence. Why? Because it's tangible. And no two people are going to disagree. If someone disagrees, then they're playing a game. Okay. The second was istifadatun sahiha. Istifada sahiha is referring to what you hear. So what your senses acquire through hearing. So you heard someone say X, Y, Z. For that person, that's a fact. That's a fact. So when the companions would hear the Prophet ﷺ say something, for them, it is factual that the Prophet ﷺ said that, and those who were there. And so you don't need evidence. How do I know that that person actually said that? Do you need to support that with evidence for your own self? No. So if you're studying directly from the Prophet ﷺ, then you don't need to prove that the Prophet ﷺ said that. You know it because you heard it. And then experience, correct experience. You experience things in life, and that experience provides you with knowledge. This is a bad decision. This is a good decision. So that's a type of knowledge because it helps what? It helps you remove ignorance because now you know how to better act. And there's a type of evidence. That evidence is what? Your own experience. In my experience in life, when you are mean to a person, they're going to retaliate. That is a type of knowledge. But it's acquired how? Through experience. So this is a type of knowledge. And again, because it's clear, it doesn't require much evidence. And the scholars have a saying, توضيح الواضحات من الفاضحات. Clarifying something that is clear is an embarrassing thing to do. It's embarrassing to do. What you find quite often now in our times here in the West, in America, people are questioning that which is obvious, like the role of biology in a person's self, male and female. What you find now is it's becoming male femininity, masculinity, male, female is becoming more defined by psychology than by biology. Biology is something clear, it's apparent. And the fact that they're resorting to something that isn't clear, that isn't apparent, it's not perceivable by the senses, is something that's embarrassing. It truly is embarrassing. Shame on them. Shame on you for doing this. Causing children to question what is unquestionable. There's something there. It clarifies, it signifies that you are a male or you are a female. And biology is more tangible than psychology. Psychology is more philosophical. Yes, there are ways of studying and determining what is right and wrong, what is clear, what is reasonable, etc. But biology is even clearer because it's something tangible. You can perceive it through the senses. And so to go from that which is clear to that which is not clear is something that's truly embarrassing. And the scholars of Islam noticed this from a long time ago. Okay, الدرجة الثانية علم خفي is less apparent knowledge. Knowledge that isn't clear. ينبت في الأسرار أو ينبت في الأسرار الطاهرة من الأبدان الزاكية بماء الرياضة الخالصة ويظهر في الأنفاس الصادقة لأهل الهمة العالية في الأحايين الخالية والأسماع الصاخية وهو علم يظهر الغائب ويغيب الشاهد ويشير إلى الجمع. Now, the more important part of this station is what we began with. Understanding the role of knowledge when it comes to our faith. The first level is pretty clear. It doesn't really change much in terms of what we do, but it helps us look at certain behaviors or certain methods of knowledge as being problematic, like when psychology usurps biology in terms of understanding the human gender or the sex of a human being. Now, Abu Ismail, the next two levels is more about the Sufi stuff and really not that important. But nonetheless, we'll go through it as quickly as possible. So the second level is referring to knowledge that isn't clear. So it's not something that you can perceive through your senses. It's not tangible, but rather there needs to be some sort of rational inquiry, some sort of methodological approach in order to determining what is true or not. And the goal of the second level is really how do we go about knowing that which is pretty much in the unseen. How do we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How do we know about the Day of Judgment? How do we know about who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is? Well, Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala says, he begins by saying, well, first and foremost, this type of knowledge needs a fertile heart to grow in. And so he says that this type of knowledge only grows in the souls that are pure and the bodies that are pure. So someone whose heart is pure and whose actions are pure. بما الرياضة الخالصة. Let's see here. And okay, so you have the land. It's fertile. It's referring to the heart and the person. When is a person qualified for this knowledge to begin to grow in them? Well, as I said, their heart needs to be pure and their actions need to be pure. How? We've gone over this a lot. Their heart isn't full of arrogance, self-righteousness, ostentation, these major spiritual diseases, and their body is pure in the sense that they apply Quran, Sunnah, they behave in accordance to Allah, to the commands of Allah and His Messenger. And then how does it grow? So when you take a seed, you plant it in the earth, the dirt needs to be fertile. But simply planting the seed in it is not going to cause it to grow. You need water for it to grow. And so similarly, this knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you plant the seed, if your heart is fertile for this, planting the seed alone isn't enough. And so knowing about who Allah is not enough to truly know who Allah is. Rather, you need to water that by al-riyada al-khalisa, by exercising these things. So knowing is one level, but applying what you know is the next level. That's how you exercise your knowledge. And so when it comes to knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so we say that Allah is the best of providers. I have knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the best of providers. وَهُوَ خَيْرُ الرَّازِقِينَ. Allah is al-Razaq al-Raziq. He is the provider. Right? I have knowledge of Allah that He is this. How do I cause this knowledge to grow to where it begins to actually produce its fruits? Well, to actually live my life knowing that Allah is this, and therefore who else to go to when it comes to my needs and my provisions than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah is the true provider and the best of providers, why would I go and ask anyone else? So you have that knowledge. How do I cause it to grow? By actually living by that knowledge and applying it. And therefore I don't ask anyone for provision besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I only ask Him. I know that Allah is my wakil, He's my wali, He's my guardian, He's my agent, He takes care of me, He's my Rabb, He's my Lord. That's information. How do I cause that information to grow to where it's actually knowledge of who Allah is? Well, I have to live by that. And so whenever something happens in my life, okay, I need to put my trust in Allah. How do I do that? That's something that grows with time. So once we plant the seed, we cause that seed to grow by exercising that information. وَيَظْهَرُ فِي الْأَنفَاسِ الصَّادِقَةِ. And this becomes clear in the breath of those who are honest, those who are truthful. Now, what does this mean? That the more this knowledge grows, right, the more that the seed of Iman and knowing Allah grows, then the more apparent it becomes in the person, him or herself. To the extent that they're constantly doing dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or it means that their love of Allah grows. How do you know that your knowledge of Allah is actually bearing fruit? Well, ask yourself the question, is my love of Allah growing? Is my remembrance of Allah growing? Is the time I spend with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala growing? And this, in order to truly acquire this, it is for لِأَهْلِ الْهِمَّةِ الْعَالِيَةِ, for the people who have strong and high aspirations, high goals. And so they say that if you reach your goals, then you set your goals too low. If you reach your goal, then you set it too low. You can apply that pretty similarly here. If you reach your goal of Iman, then you weren't ambitious enough. How can we ever be satisfied with our level of Iman when there's still so much more? How can we be satisfied with X level in paradise when the very next level is so much more? And to reach the very next level is sometimes as simple as doing 2 rak'ahs. And for the rest of eternity, I will have so much more than if I weren't to do those 2 rak'ahs. And so someone who wants the fruits of knowledge of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to truly bear and ripen, then they need to have high aspirations. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ teaches us. Man sa'al al-Jannah فَلْيَسْأَلْ الْفِرْدَوْسِ الْأَعْلَى. Whoever asks for paradise, then asks for the highest levels of paradise. This is logic. This makes sense. فِي الْأَحَايِينَ الْخَالِيَةِ. And their knowledge of Allah should best bear fruit when they are by themselves, when they're alone. That is where the essence of a person's relationship with Allah should always have the clearest form. And so notice the Prophet ﷺ, as far as I know, never once cried in salah when he was praying in a congregation. As far as I know, I don't think there's a report where the Prophet ﷺ cried while praying Isha prayer, or Fajr prayer, or Maghrib prayer. Rather, the times when he cried was when he was doing tahajjud in his home. And yeah, sometimes there would be a companion there praying with him, but it's still a type of seclusion. And the Prophet ﷺ teaches us that whoever's eyes shed tears, khashyatillah, min khashyatillah, out of awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then those eyes will never see, will never be burned by hellfire, something along those lines. But when they're alone,
what does khashya mean?
Awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, khushu', from khushu', right? And so, don't see it as very virtuous when someone is crying in front of millions of people. Let me just say it that way. Allahu a'lam what's in their hearts. But don't be deceived by that. Don't say, oh, mashallah, this person has so much iman. We don't care about crying in public.
True.
We care about you crying alone. That's what matters.
Yes.
That's what matters.
So true.
Right?
Sometimes like
And crying and whatnot, and there's a million people following them. Come on. Right? That's not the part of the sunnah of the Prophet. Again, I don't mean that these people are insincere. Let me be very clear. Allahu a'lam, Allah knows best what's in their hearts. I just don't want us to think that just because someone is crying while reciting a verse of the Quran or while reading a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that's a sign this person, mashallah, this person is a person of taqwa. No. If they're crying alone, no one sees them, that is a person of taqwa. That's how the companions were. That's how the Prophet ﷺ was.
even though reading the Quran, sometimes the makras is so hard to say. I'm learning with some like Arab style.
Mm-hmm.
Repeat and repeat. I cry from the Quran. Why so difficult to say it?
Yeah.
May Allah give me. Allah.
I think people are cold. It's not fair to others. You're cold.
I'm fine. It's okay. Don't worry about that. So let's continue this so we don't kind of...
I'm sorry, yeah.
if you're cold, just go ahead and
No, I'm
turn it
not
on.
cold, but it seems
Alright.
like people.
No?
And then... All right. We're still in the talk. Right. So, also the person, وَالْأَسْمَاء الصَّاخِيَةِ, the ears of the ones who don't listen to that which is inappropriate. Not just inappropriate, don't listen to that which is meaningless. Our senses have a lot of influence on our hearts. A lot. And for that reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to lower our gaze and to not listen to that which is falsehood, to that which is inappropriate. Right? It has a lot of influence. We went over the station of as-sama'. And remember what we spoke about there, go back and listen to it again. And so if we want knowledge of Allah to truly grow, we have to put a lot of effort in terms of what we're looking at and what we're hearing, because it affects the heart. And iman in Allah, our knowledge of Allah, is not going to grow if we're filling our ears with that which is inappropriate, with that which is meaningless. It doesn't necessarily have to be haram, but that which is meaningless, it enters our ears. So if you can imagine, meaninglessness is coming and enters our ears, it enters our heart. Yeah. Now you have a part of your heart that's just meaningless, and it's attracted to meaningless things. Or the eyes are looking at that which is inappropriate, that enters the heart. And so no, any Muslim, or Muslims who fall into zina, fornication, don't think it just comes out of nowhere. Just all of a sudden some girl comes, hey, let's have some fun. It's not the way it works. A lot of times it starts with they're looking at that which is haram, and that develops into looking at pornography, and then that develops into an even more lustful heart. And may Allah protect us. We're not here to judge people, but to protect ourselves, to critique ourselves. And this needs a lot more focus. Is not the time to do it, but just it's serious. وَهُوَ عِلْمٌ يُظْهِرُ الْغَيْبِ. And this type of knowledge, the knowledge of the less apparent knowledge, is knowledge that makes clear that which is unseen, and makes unseen that which is seen, observable. And it points to unison. Okay, what does he mean here? I'm just going to avoid all of the overly complex Sufism that tends to come with these types of statements. But what I'll say is the following. The unseen in Islam, in spirituality, is more critical, more important than that which is observable. And therefore, Allah praises Iman in the unseen. He doesn't praise Iman in the seen. So we're not going to praise anyone for saying, I know the sky is blue. I believe the sky is blue. Well, yeah, congratulations. We all do. We see it. Right? But belief in the unseen, because it requires more, because it requires extra steps, because there's room for doubt, room for questions, knowledge in the unseen is more important. And the more the unseen plays a role in our life, the more fertile our hearts are for Iman. And therefore, the one who is more interested in Allah than they are in worldly life, the one who is more interested and attached to the afterlife than they are to this life, that is a heart that is fertile for strong Iman. Okay, so Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala, according to how I'm explaining this, essentially what this the second level is that knowledge of the unseen is extremely important. Why? Because that knowledge helps make our hearts fertile for Iman. And the knowledge that we want to pursue that is truly worthy of our time is knowledge that will make the afterlife more real, make us more attached to the afterlife. And so if there is a topic that is best when it comes to khutbahs and whatnot, it is when we talk about the afterlife. When we talk about the afterlife, because that is what truly makes people, makes their hearts viable for Iman. But if we're not thinking of the afterlife, or if the afterlife seems like a distant reality, or it seems very vague or ambiguous, then this life is going to take precedence. Why? Because we see it. It's near to us. It's tangible. We can taste it. We can see it. We can smell it. We can enjoy it, etc. And so the knowledge that we want is the knowledge that makes the afterlife, the unseen, as though we can see it. Like the companions of Allah Ta'ala an. One time the Prophet ﷺ asked the companion, how do you feel? Or how have you woken up this morning? He said, I have woken up as though I can see the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I could see paradise and hellfire and whatnot. It's not that he's literally seeing them with his eyes, but he's so attached to these things that it's as though he sees it. And it's narrated that Ali radiallahu ta'ala an said that if I were to see paradise and I were to see hellfire, it would not change my Iman one bit. Why? Because he was already so attached to it. It's as though he sees it right in front of him. So if you were to physically see it, it really makes no difference, because his heart sees this right in front of him. radiallahu ta'ala an. And this knowledge puts aside more and more, pushes away more and more what is observable. So it pushes more and more, pushes this life away from them more and more. They become less, their desires are less attached to this life. They're less concerned about the worldly gains. They're less concerned about their pleasures in this life. That is true knowledge. This is when we know our knowledge of Islam is really working. When the afterlife becomes more important to us than this life. That is true knowledge. Okay. Wallahu ta'ala alam. We have one more level here. You know what? Anyway, we'll go ahead and just finish it next week. It's really not too interesting. But nonetheless, I don't want to skip over anything that might be of some benefit to us. So we'll go ahead and stop here, and we'll briefly go over the third level next time, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.